Hey, what's up everybody, it's Alby, and today I have a modern deck tech for you guys. So I played this deck at a PPTQ on Saturday, and then I played it again on Monday for Modern Night Monday. PPTQ, I'm not going to tell you what the result is quite yet. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that towards the beginning of the video. But in Modern on Monday, I went 3-0-6-0 with it, so didn't drop a single game with this deck. This deck is pretty sweet. We're playing 7 Seas Merfolk. And so I said I wasn't going to give you guys the result of my PPTQ, and that's because in the description of this video there's going to be a PPTQ recap that I wrote up on the Kitchen Table MTG forums. You guys can go ahead and check that out, go ahead and give that a quick read, and hopefully you guys will enjoy that. A lot of people liked the last article that I did with the 10 standard deck techs for Hour of Devastation. A lot of people really liked that, and so I figured I'd write up something else, so I wrote up my PPTQ recap. You guys can check that out in the description below, and without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into the deck tech. So this is 7 Seas Merfolk. So where does the name 7 Seas come from, and how is it different than a basic Merfolk deck where we are playing the standard 4 copies of Spreading Seas like most modern Merfolk decks will run, but then we're also running 3 copies of Seas Claim in the main board. So they basically just do the same thing, turn target land into an island. This enables island walk for some of our creatures, as well as stops things like Tron. If you turn one of their Tron lands into an island, then it makes it harder for them to acquire Tron. So I really like the 7 Seas version. It's also really good against decks that have greedy mana bases, decks that are trying to run 3 colors. Some even run like 4 colors. You can just shut them off of a color very easily by playing one of these, targeting one of their lands. So you can just win a lot of games by like mana screwing your opponents off of these cards, as well as just using them as enablers to get your creatures island walk on board if your opponent isn't playing any islands. For our creatures, we have 12 Lords in the deck, which is really sweet. The Merfolk deck is very synergistic, and so playing 12 Lords is a lot, and it's really good. So we're running 4 copies of Lord of Atlantis, 4 copies of Master of the Pearl Trident, as well as 4 copies of Mirror Regery. So that gives us 8 2-mana Lords, and then 4 3-mana Lords. So we can basically play a 2-mana Lord into a 3-mana Lord. We can do something like play a 1-drop, play a 2-mana Lord, play a 3-drop Lord, and then just start swinging in. It can be really, really sweet. To go along with these Lords, we're also playing a bunch of other Merfolk. We have 4 copies of Curse Catcher and 4 copies of Silvergill Adept. These cards are very sweet. Silvergill Adept gives us some card draw because the only other card draw we have in the deck is Spreading Seas. And so when you're a blue deck, you want some card draw, and we're an aggro deck, so needing card draw is, well, we're not necessarily an aggro deck, but we're a creature heavy deck, so card draw to continuously just get more creatures and put the creatures out onto the board is very, very sweet for us. Curse Catcher is just probably the best 1-drop Merfolk, and so it's a very nice spot for our curve. And it can also be very good against decks like Storm and other things that are trying to run instants and sorceries. To go along with these other creatures, we'll also have 3 copies of Harbinger of the Tides and 4 copies of Master of Waves. Harbinger of the Tides, just always a really good card. It's a nice tempo play, and if you're playing the Merfolk Mirror, Harbinger of the Tides is one of the most important cards, as well as Master of the Pearl Trident. Those are the 2 best cards in the Merfolk Mirror. But Harbinger is just always really good if your opponent wants to race you. This can really set them back. Master of Waves is very good if the game goes long. It's also very good against burn because of having protection from red. And then we're running 3 different 1-ofs. So I have a 1-of Tidebinder Mage, a 1-of Phantasmal Image, and a 1-of Kira Great Glass Spinner. Kira is very good against decks that are heavy in removal, things like Grixis Delver, things like not necessarily Death Shadow, but it's pretty good against burn sometimes. It depends on the level of the burn player you're playing against. If they know to just target your face with every burn spell, then Kira isn't as good. But if your opponent's one of the burn players who likes to target creatures, then Kira can sometimes be good. It's good against Abzan, it's good against Jund, decks like that. Phantasmal Image is in here because it acts as an additional Lord. We need to have another Lord out originally, but then it basically makes it so we're running 13 copies of Lords, which is pretty sweet. And then Phantasmal Image can also just copy other creatures as well. I was playing against Bant Eldrazi at one point, and I copied my opponent's Reality Smasher to swing in for lethal, which was pretty sweet. And then Tidebinder Mage, this was in here solely for the PBTQ. I wanted a better matchup against Burn, and I wanted a better matchup against the Collected Company decks. Most of them run Mana Dorks, so the Tidebinder Mage was an additional way to shut off their Mana Dorks. things like Noble Hierarch and Birds of Paradise. So Tidebinder Mage was kind of a hedge, knowing that I was going to be playing against those decks in the PPTQ. If you know your meta already and you're planning on building this deck, and you don't think you would be playing against things like Burn, you don't think you would be playing against things like Abzan or things like the Collected Company decks, and I would recommend turning the Tidebinder Mage in the main board into the 4th copy of Harbinger of the Tides. Like I said, I was running it more as just a hedge for the PPTQ, know your opponents, kind of get an idea of the metagame, and I kind of felt like I was going to be playing against decks where Tidebinder Mage would be good, so I had the Tidebinder Mage. To kind of wrap the deck all together, we have 4 copies of Aether Vial. This can let us flash in our creatures out of nowhere, which is very sweet. It can mess up combat math, especially if we flash in something like a Lord. Our opponent might not be accounting for us to have an additional 1 power and 1 toughness on each of our creatures. Flashing in things at our opponent's end step can also be very good as well. It gives us a little bit of a hedge against things like sorcery speed board wipes. If our opponent wants to wipe the board, we can say that's fine, and then at their end of turn we can flash in another creature with the Aether Vial. So Aether Vial helps us get off to really fast starts, and is definitely a key piece to the deck. Other than that, we're just running a few lands. We are running 19 lands. Merfolk is generally a very land light deck, so like I said, 19 lands, 10 of which are just basic islands, and then we have 2 Cavern of Souls, 2 Wanderwine Hub, 1 Oboro Palace in the Clouds, and 4 copies of Mutavault. Mutavault's very important in this deck because Mutavault's clause says that it has all creature types, so it gets all the buffs from our Merfolk Lords as well as things like Island Walk for our Master of the Pro Shrine and Lord of Atlantis. Granting Island Walk, our Mutavault basically just acts as another Merfolk for us that can't die to sorcery speed removal, which is pretty sweet. Unless we activate it on their turn, but most of the time we're not going to be activating a Mutavault on their turn. Oboro and Mutavault have a pretty sweet interaction where if you have Oboro plus Mutavault, you can float a blue mana from Oboro, tap the Mutavault to create a colorless mana, use the colorless mana to return Oboro back to your hand, replay Oboro, and then tap it for another blue mana, which would give us the ability to play something like a Lord of Atlantis, Master of the Pearl Trident, Harbinger of the Tides, or Tidebinder Mage, something that requires a double blue in the mana cost, and we can cast those off of just an Oboro and Mutavault, which is pretty sweet. So Oboro is definitely a sweet card. The 2 Wanderwine Hubs are just kind of in there as ways to protect us against Choke as well. Choke is very sweet against our deck. If our opponent casts a Choke, then we're basically down to Wanderwine Hubs, Oboro Palace in the Clouds, and the 2 Cavern of Souls to create blue mana, and the Cavern of Souls don't even create blue mana for our Spreading Seas or Seas claims, so we're definitely pretty bad against Choke. So the Wanderwine Hubs are just a little bit of a hedge against that card. Other than that, the mana base is pretty simple. Cavern of Souls can't create blue mana for our Seas claim or Spreading Seas, so we have all the other blue sources for that. And I think that's basically it. Moving on to the sideboard, this is the sideboard I'm running. It was kind of for the meta that I was expecting at the PPTQ, and I'll go ahead and talk about where I bring in each of the cards and why I bring in each of the cards. So the first card that I'm bringing in is 3 copies of Relic of Progenitus. Relic of Progenitus are really good against any graveyard-based decks, things like Abzan, things like Storm if they're playing the Gifts Ungiven Past in Flames version of Storm. Then Relic of Progenitus can be really good against there. It's also very good against Snapcaster Mage decks. Anything running like Tasigur or Delve Creatures, Gurmag Angler. Relic of Progenitus can be really good against them as well, so I run 3 copies of that. Then I run 3 copies of Ceremonious Rejection. It's really good against Eldrazi Tron, Bant Eldrazi, Regular Tron, Affinity. Basically, any deck just running colorless stuff, it can be very, very sweet. You guys are going to read in the article, like I said, it's in the description. You guys can go ahead and read that. You're going to read that I made a very, very sick play in round 5 against one of my opponents with Ceremonious Rejection. Felt very, very sweet. Paying 1 mana to counter a Karn is just such a good tempo play for our deck. If your opponent somehow manages to get Natural Tron, which is very hard since we're running Seas Claim and Spreading Seas, if they somehow manage to get Natural Tron, then Ceremonious Rejection definitely helps. Next, I'm running 3 copies of Gutshot. Gutshot is there to stop things like Noble Hierarch, Young Pyromancer, Birds of Paradise, basically any 1 toughness creature that you can think of. It's very good against Affinity as well, things like Signal Pest, Steel Overseer. If they somehow didn't play another artifact already and they only just played like I don't know, Spire of Industry plus basic land, then you could kill an Arcbound Ravager with it, but that's unlikely because normally they would have already played another artifact. But it's very good against Affinity, very good against the green-white Collected Company deck. It also kills things like Eternal Witness too in that deck. Vizier of Remedies, it kills that as well. Next, I'm running 2 copies of Unified Will. This is very good in all sorts of matchups where our opponent doesn't have as many creatures as we do. We are a very creature-heavy deck. The only cards that aren't... I think we're running 29 creatures in the main deck, so Unified Will is very good against things like Tron again, because they don't have many creatures. Ad Nauseam, it's really good against Ad Nauseam. Basically just any deck where you don't think your opponent's going to be running that many creatures. A lot of control decks, it's very good against those as well, because normally control decks only have things like Celestial Colonnade or Snapcaster Mage as their creatures, and Celestial Colonnade requires them to pay mana. So Unified Will gives us a very good counterspell against those kind of decks. I'm running 1 additional copy of Tidebinder Mage in the sideboard as well. Again, same thing I talked about in the beginning. It gives us a good matchup against, or it's very good against Burn, very good against any deck just running green. I boarded in basically against any deck running green and against any deck running red. Then we have Echoing Truth and Hurkyl's Recall. Those are both in there for the same purpose. They're in there to get rid of its Snaring Bridge. The deck is very bad against Ensnaring Bridge. The only way that we can remove it is either countering it with a Unified Will or a Ceremonious Rejection, or picking it back up with a Hurkyl's Recall or an Echoing Truth. Hurkyl's Recall is also just very good against Affinity and Lantern Control. I forgot to say Lantern Control with Ceremonious Rejection as well. We definitely board in Ceremonious Rejections against Lantern Control. So Hurkyl's Recall, very good against just any artifact-based deck. Echoing Truth also gives us an out to the card Worship, because we don't have a way to beat Worship since I'm not running any copies of Vapor Snag. Vapor Snag is usually the only way to for Merfolk to beat Worship, but since I'm not running any, Echoing Truth is just the only way to do that. That's why I'm running 1 Echoing Truth, 1 Hurkyl's Recall instead of 2 Hurkyl's Recall, or 2 Echoing Truths. I like Hurkyl's Recall against Affinity. So yeah, Echoing Truth and Hurkyl's Recall, very good against Worship, very good against Ensnaring Bridge. If I'm expecting my opponent to bring those in, then I have to bring those in as just a hedge, because it's the only possible way for me to beat those cards. And then the final card in the sideboard is a single copy of Dispel, which is very good against things like Burn, things like control decks, Ad Nauseam as well, because Ad Nauseam is an instant. Just basically any deck that plays instants that we're scared of, we just board in the Dispel. Very mana efficient because it only costs us 1 blue mana. So this has been the deck. I played this deck at the PPTQ, like I said, and then piloted it to a 3-0-6-0 finish last Monday. If you guys want to figure out how I did at the PPTQ, go ahead and read the article that I'm posting in the description below. Hopefully you guys did enjoy the deck tech. If you guys have any questions about the deck, go ahead and just ask me in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to answer them for you. I'm really starting to like this deck. I've been playing original Merfolk for a few months now, but I switched over to the 7 Seas version last week, and I'm really enjoying it. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Leave a like if you did. Go ahead and comment down below. Any questions, like I said, I'll answer them. If you guys just want to leave positive feedback, I'd appreciate that as well. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching the video. Peace.